This week's project is special. It's a maple bowl, twice turned. It originally was wet. Wood that was given to me from a friend of mine. It's always a good idea as a wood turner when someone gives you wood, you give them a bowl. And it's also an exciting project because I have done a three-legged bowl on it, and I've also used a new product, a wood stain called Unicorn Spit. And you know, with a name like Unicorn Spit, it's got to be good. Stay tuned. Let me know what you think of it. Now here I'm showing in slow motion. You can see initially that I'm not getting a lot of continuous shavings coming off because I'm still cutting air. You can see that as it's bouncing around a bit. I am turning slow. But as I work further up the bowl, I get a continuous cut, and you can see the nice shaving that's coming off here in slow motion. So here you can see the rough turned bowl. It's only rough turned, not referring to the surface, but rather the fact that it's left large, thicker than normal, and that allows for distortion while drying. Because this wood was wet, cut down in the fall, it will have to dry. Here you can see a good shot of the tenon. I'd like to use a tenon rather than a mortise, but I often will put a tenon inside of a mortise. Not that I will grab it with a mortise. When using a mortise, it means that you're going to be holding the bowl in expansion mode. And I find that they are more prone to failure. I prefer to use a tenon because then you're holding the bowl in compression. So as I mentioned, because this wood is wet, I'll now put it in my kiln to dry.
Several days later.
So the bowl has come out of the kiln. It is out around, I don't know if you can notice that, but it's definitely shrunk in this direction. Again, the tree was growing in this direction, so it shrunk in on the sides. So I'm going to have to make it round, that's why I left it thick. It's below 15% moisture, it's around 12. Typically I'd like to take it a little bit lower, but I think that will be fine. The other thing is that tenon actually doesn't look too bad, but I will round that up a little bit. I left it a little big, so I will round it back up and shape the sides to make sure that it's a good shape for my chuck. If you leave this out around, then the bowl will rock a little bit, so it's a good idea to straighten that out. And then we'll start turning. It didn't crack. There were a few cracks when I put it in the kiln. I put some CA glue on it. They certainly didn't get worse, and no new cracks appeared. They're not bad. They're just a little bit right there on the outside. We'll never notice those once everything is done. So let's go ahead and get this cleaned up, and then we'll get it mounted and start turning. So the bowl was in my kiln about 5 days, and it went in at over 30% and came out around 12. You can see it is out of round, although it's not as bad as it looks. It appears worse on camera because the rim is not flat, so it's making it look worse than it is. The side is out of round, but not as bad, again, as it looks. So the first thing I'll do is I just use my carbide tool to establish my rim. Because the rim isn't continuous, because it's not flat, I find this is the best tool just to get that established, so I'll have an edge for the bevel of my bowl gouge to ride against. So I'm just barely touching there. It is round there, but I'm here, I'm going to say close to 1/4 of an inch. So that's how much that's gone out of round. It's a lot. And you can see it when it's turning, it's out of round. Now that I have that lip established, I can switch to my bowl gouge, which again is going to remove the most amount of material in the quickest amount of time and also give me the best finished surface. The other thing you'll notice there is my gouge was skipping. You're better off coming uphill. I was going downhill. That's problem number one. Problem number two is I didn't have a bevel. I didn't have room for my bevel to ride. And because this top is out of round as well, when it was coming around, I was pushing my gouge out. So I'm going to go a little further and do a bit better job establishing that rim. Now that I have a good edge established, I can switch to my bowl gouge with confidence and get a good cut and surface coming down the bottom of the bowl. Again, as I mentioned earlier, typically you like to go what's referred to as uphill, starting at the bottom of the bowl and working up. That means that all the fibers in front of the tool are supported. Right now I am going downhill. And that means that as I'm pushing down, I'm pushing against fibers because the bowl is getting smaller in diameter that are not supported. Generally, that's not the way to a smoothest cut. Generally, I'd go the other way. But with everything, sometimes things don't work as expected, and I will go uphill just to do a refining cut, which will give me a better surface. There, the outside is shaped. I'll go over that with a negative rake scraper to get rid of these ridges, but I'm fine with that. We'll keep the maximum diameter of the bowl and we'll start working on the inside. I didn't show it because often with my bowl gouge I'm blocking the view from this camera angle so you don't see much on the inside. But you can see the shavings laying on the bed of my lathe and around. Those came from the inside, mostly with my bowl gouge. At this point, I'm doing a finish cut and I'm using a scraper. Scraper will give you a nice finish cut, either a scraper or my carbide tool that you see here. Scraper does a good job coming up the side. Sometimes you can get a little catch right on the bottom, and that's why I'm using my carbide here. So now I'll stop and measure the thickness, which is important, not only so that you don't go too thin, but also so that it's uniform. I've shown this before on my channel, but I have the bowl flipped around. I just have a piece of wood in my tail, or in my chuck, and I'm just doing a friction hold here by pushing the bowl up against it. And I have an anti-slip cloth that you see there as well. What I was doing was just thinning out that mortise that was there because I'm going to make a tri-legged bowl. So I kept a thin ring all the way around, and then I'm going to use a combination here of my hand saw, also a reciprocating saw, and a rotary Dremel tool just to smooth everything up. And I'm going to end up with 3 legs. So I marked it out at 120 degrees, and I ended up with about a 1/2 inch wide leg, 3 of those. It's a little slow going doing the cutting here, but I think in the end it's a nice complement to this bowl. Here I'm using my oscillating tool just to cut that down a little bit quicker than the handsaw. The other thing you'll notice is that there's a piece of bark inclusion there. I planned to get rid of that all along, and it was a nice fit. Here's the finished product after cutting and doing some sanding, and you can see how the 3 legs are there now and are nice and smooth. Once that's cut, then I flip the bowl around because I'm going to put wipe-on poly on the inside of this bowl. So that's what I'm doing here now. And I just have some tape on the outside to prevent any wipe-on poly from getting on the side where I'm going to put some stain on it. I want to be able to allow the stain to penetrate in. So if it had wipe-on poly on it, that would prevent that stain penetration. So with wipe-on poly, I put 2 coats on with a brush fairly uniformly, and then sand in between, and subsequent coats, and I did end up putting 6, subsequent coats I'll usually apply with a paper towel. Once that's done, I then again reverse chuck this bowl the same as I did previously, and you got to see that piece of wood there. And then I make very light cuts to remove the tenon. I try and make most of my cuts by pushing towards my drive, away from my tailstock, so that I don't put a lot of sideways loading on the bowl because I don't want it to push it off the friction fit and have it come off the lathe. So I tend to try and push as much as I can straight into the drive. Again, here's the bottom of the bowl with the 3 feet that I mentioned previously. But here's the moment we've all been waiting for. The usage of the unicorn spit. As I mentioned, with a name like unicorn spit, it's got to be good. So I did apply it directly to the wood. You have some options there. You could apply it to the cloth and then wipe it on. I found that applying it that way maybe made it a bit easier so that you didn't get any real dark spots right off the beginning. And you can also play with it with the amount of color that you want, the depth of color, and even just what you want to show through. So I played with it a little bit, adding it slowly to see what look I liked. You can also water it down a bit if you want more of a wash look. I did want a darker look, but I did want, and you're going to get this with the stain anyway, but some areas that are a little thinner than others, so it gives it a bit of that marbly type look about it. Overall, very pleased with the product, very easy to apply, very easy to control the amount of color that you end up developing, and I think it looks very nice. It's a little flat right here, but in a moment I'm going to apply wipe-on poly to this, which will also tend to even it out, and it will also give it that shine and gloss that we're looking for. So here's a finished product, the inside of it just being the natural maple color. And the outside with gloss, the unicorn spit. Very pleased with the way it turned out. I like the variance in the color and just the overall shade of it as well. Let me know what you think, whether this is your style, having a bowl with color on it like this. Leave a comment. Let me know.